In 1976, 100 miles northwest of Scapa Flow, Scotland, the U.S. Navy and several allies were participating in Teamwork 76, a 100-ship NATO naval exercise in the North Atlantic. On 14 September 1976, during that exercise, a Grumman F-14 Tomcat went overboard off the USS John F. Kennedy with the AIM-54 Phoenix missile. The pilot and radio intercept officer, or RIO, ejected from the plane, but the Tomcat and Phoenix quickly sank to the bottom of the icy waters of the North Atlantic. Being the exercise was closely watched by the Soviet Navy, a rescue operation was quickly put together to recover the Tomcat and the Phoenix. The United States had to get that plane and missile from the bottom of the ocean before it was recovered by the Soviets. The need to get this equipment before the Soviets did was due to the cutting-edge technology of both the Tomcat and the Phoenix missile. The Tomcat was equipped with the revolutionary AWG-9 radar. This radar was so complex it needed its own operator, commonly referred to as a RIO. This is what Goose did in the movie Top Gun. The radar could lock onto 6 different targets at once, as well as redirecting weaponry to alternate targets while the missiles were in flight. The AWG-9's radar field extended from the treetops to 80,000 feet above ground level, or AGL, and 100 plus miles away. The AIM-54 Phoenix was a solid propellant rocket which could reach out 100 miles from where it was launched. The Phoenix could travel at speeds of over 3,000 miles per hour and could reach targets up to an altitude of 100,000 feet AGL. The U.S. had to retrieve these objects before the Soviets could and reverse engineer them. However, the fact the Tomcat and the Phoenix sank to a depth of about 1,800 feet below the waves was presenting some difficulties in the recovery attempts. Luckily, there was a super secretive, small, deep-diving nuclear submarine conducting another classified mission close by. When the classified sub was volunteered to aid with the recovery efforts, it was so secret at the time, many of the commanders of the surface fleet had to be made aware the sub even existed. Starting 21 October 1976, the smallest nuclear submarine in the U.S. Navy arrived on scene. The sub was the NR-1, and it was so secret that before its arrival for Operation Big Daddy, a bigger and faster attack submarine was sent in to sanitize the area of any Soviet threats. By 30 October, the NR-1 had located the Tomcat and the Phoenix, and with the help of the sub's hydraulic manipulator arm, aided in the recovery of both. Nerwin, as the crew referred to the NR-1, kept U.S. technology out of the Soviets' hands. After nearly 40 years of silent service, the NR-1 was retired on 21 November 2008. Most of the NR-1's missions were cloak and dagger, dual-purpose missions which presented themselves as oceanographic studies for cover. The NR-1 was so secretive, even though there was an effort to preserve it for historical interest, the Navy scrapped almost the entire sub. Upon decommissioning, the entire hull was dismantled to avoid any public display. Parts which were in public view, such as the sail, upper rudder, propellers, and manipulator arm, were allowed to be saved, and in 2013 were sent to the Submarine Force Library and Museum in Groton, Connecticut to be displayed. This is a story of Rickover's rubber duck, the NR-1. The NR-1 was the brainchild of Admiral Hyman Rickover, who was the longest-serving U.S. military member ever of any branch. With a career spanning 63 years from 1918 to 1982, Rickover is referred to as the father of the nuclear navy. Rickover believed in nuclear power and directed the original development of naval nuclear propulsion. For 3 decades, Rickover was the director of the U.S. Naval Reactors Office. In 1945, Rickover was promoted to Inspector General with the 19th Fleet and was assigned to work with General Electric to develop a nuclear propulsion plant for destroyers. General Electric's Electric Boat Company, now owned by General Dynamics, was the first shipyard to build America's submarines and nuclear-powered ships. The Electric Boat Company sold to the U.S. Navy their first submarine, the Holland, in the year 1900. In 1954, with oversight from Rickover's Naval Reactors Branch, the USS Nautilus, the first nuclear-powered submarine, was built by the Electric Boat Company and put to sea. With the Soviets launching the K-3, their first nuclear-powered submarine, in 1957, both sides had the ability to move near silently under the sea, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse, the story of which most of us will never know. With both sides having nuclear-powered submarines capable of deploying ICBMs with nuclear warheads, the Cold War was charging ahead full steam quietly under the waves. This deadly game was close guarded by the Naval Intelligence and the Central Intelligence Agency, which kept Rickover out. Rickover, who is not known for a cool and calm or even kind demeanor, decided to build his own spy submarine to be part of the action. Disaster struck the whole U.S. naval community when on 10 April 1963 the USS Thresher was lost at sea with all 129 aboard during a deep diving test. Although this was catastrophic to the U.S. Navy, this incident gave Rickover the opportunity he needed to build his sub under the Deep Sea Rescue Vehicle Program's secret budget. To secure funds for the NR-1, Rickover classified the sub as a deep-sea search and rescue vessel, which would receive general public approval with little question to what tax dollars were actually being used for. The NR-1 was never commissioned or officially named to the U.S. Naval Fleet, which allowed Rickover to circumvent the political and departmental oversight normally associated with the construction of warships. Without being a commissioned ship, the NR-1 also remained out of the 41 for freedom nuclear submarine quota at the time. But to stay within the guidelines of this project, the sub could not have any war capabilities. In 1965, John P. Craven, the chief scientist at the U.S. Navy's Special Projects Office, was modifying the USS Halibut to make the Halibut suitable for covert special operations. Specifically, the Navy wanted the Halibut to hover in place and dangle cameras miles down, deep enough to scout the ocean floor for Soviet treasures. But Rickover didn't want a sub capable of dangling cameras down. He wanted a sub which could reach the bottom of the ocean. Rickover recruited Craven to help design and build the NR-1. Named after the Naval Reactors Program Rickover directed, the Nuclear Reactor 1, or NR-1, would be the smallest and deepest diving nuclear-powered U.S. sub at the time. It was only 145-ish feet in length and about 12.5 feet in diameter. The hull was specially designed to be perfectly round, no more than a 1/16 of an inch out of round to withstand the immense water pressures at deep depth. At the time, it was the most precise submarine hull the Electric Boat Company had ever built. Declassified information details the NR-1 was capable of diving to about 3,000 feet deep, but I believe it could go much deeper. Retractable tires were also installed on the bottom of the hull, which allowed the NR-1 to drive on the seafloor. Thrusters designed into the bow or front and the stern or the rear of the hull in an X design allowed the sub great maneuverability underwater and gave the NR-1 the ability to stay in the same place for extended periods or to turn around with little forward movement, kind of like a helicopter but underwater. The thrusters were mounted on a 45-degree angle to the long axis of the hull, which also allowed their use without disturbing the ocean floor. This would be valuable because there were 3 hull windows on the NR-1. One which gave a view directly below the sub, and one to each side of this center window. These 3 viewing windows allowed a crew member to look through and scour the ocean floor. The NR-1 would be very sophisticated for its time. It would be fitted with exterior lighting, television and still cameras for photographic studies, and a hydraulic manipulator arm, which could be used with a variety of gripping and cutting tools along with a retractable work basket to hold objects for recovery or placement. A jetter was later installed which used pressurized water to dig through the ocean floor or bury objects. Surface vision would be through a television periscope permanently installed in the fixed mast of the NR-1's sail. Power was provided by a General Electric small nuclear reactor which was about the size of a residential refrigerator and produced approximately 130 horsepower. This reactor was operated by only 1 crew member and was in service for the entire lifespan of the NR-1. Outfitted with state-of-the-art electrical components, the crew's comforts were the bare minimum. For instance, there was no kitchen, and the crew would eat frozen microwavable meals. There were no showers aboard the NR-1, and the crew had to bathe out of their sink. This occurred a couple times a week. Oxygen was produced by chloride candles, which when burnt created a chemical reaction, the byproduct of which produced oxygen and table salt. Carbon monoxide and hydrogen gas were removed from the sub's inner atmosphere with the use of a catalytic converter system. Carbon dioxide was removed through replaceable lithium hydroxide canisters. The NR-1 could only fit a crew between 10 to 13 depending on the mission. Being nuclear powered, the NR-1 could remain submerged indefinitely but was reduced to about a month's time due to some design limitations, which included the amount of food which the NR-1 could store and the toilet tank system. The NR-1 was constructed inside the covered dry dock shed at the Electric Boat Company to avoid satellite detection or tracking by the Soviets. On 25 January 1969, the NR-1 was launched and it started its secretive career with the U.S. Navy. With the sail and rudder painted with bright red, it appeared to fulfill its role as a search and rescue vessel. The NR-1 was very slow compared to other submarines at the time, traveling at only about 4 miles per hour when submerged. This caused the NR-1 to be towed by a support ship to or near its intended areas of operation. Considered slow at the time, the NR-1 participated in various classified missions, many of which are still not known. The NR-1 was stationed on the East Coast and specifically operated in the Atlantic under Rickover's direction, while the USS Halibut was under Naval Intelligence Command in the Pacific. Although the NR-1 was painted in bright colors to pass its operations off as a search and rescue mission, along with oceanographic studies, the NR-1 was used in highly classified missions. Some of the NR-1's most secretive missions are referenced as Black Sail missions. In these missions, the NR-1 would be secretly towed to various locations, and its sail, which was often painted red, would be painted black to aid in hiding the NR-1 in the ocean. One of these Black Sail missions took place in the Mediterranean Sea in 1971. While the NR-1 was participating in the mission, Project AFAR, which stands for Azores Fixed Acoustic Range, something was found by the U.S. Navy in the Strait of Messina, which is between Italy and Sicily. As soon as the NR-1 came back from placing underwater communications towers in the Azores off the coast of Ponta Delgado, Portugal, with Project AFAR, The NR-1 was tasked with finding what was at the bottom of the sea in the Strait of Messina. However, this mission would have to be kept completely covert. The US did not want the Soviets to know something was found at the bottom of the strait. In the 1970s, the sea had changed. Under Admiral Sergei Gorshkov, the Red Navy was built up to rival the United States. By 1970, the US fleet did not have complete control of the world's oceans as it did just a few years prior, and the Mediterranean Sea, or Med, was not a permissive environment anymore due to the number of Soviet ships in it. The fear of war between Russia and the US was constant, and the US needed to know what the Russians had under the waves in case of war. Black sails and dark waters. For the journey to the Strait of Messina in the Med, the NR-1 would be placed aboard the deck of the USS Portland, a landing ship dock. To get the NR-1 aboard, weight would be added to the Portland so it could sink itself deep enough in the ocean the NR-1 could slowly move onto a wooden dolly on the dock. Once aboard, the Portland would rise up out of the water and the NR-1 would be covered by a tent. In the dead of night, the NR-1 was loaded onto the Portland, covered in a tent on the dock, and the sail was painted black as the Portland left the US heading towards the Med. Although the NR-1 was transported above the waves for this mission, later black sail missions would add a layer of stealth by the NR-1 being towed under the ocean by another submarine. When the Portland arrived in the Med, it was accompanied by the 6th Fleet Carrier Battle Group to protect its cargo from the watching eyes of the Soviets. Even with the chaperone, the Carrier Battle Group was encircled by the Russian fleet. The Russians wanted to find out what was under the tarp on the deck of the Portland so badly, the Portland was swarmed by Soviet planes and 2 gunboats attempted to ram the Portland. The gunboats were cut off by U.S. escorts in the battle group. In the dead of night, the Portland went dark, turning off its port lights, sank its deck into the Med, and the NR-1 slipped into dark waters. The NR-1 disguised itself against Russian sonar by staying on the bottom of the Med, hiding amongst the many sunken ships laying on the bottom. After the NR-1 was dropped off, the carrier group left the area and the Red Fleet followed, proving the Soviets had no idea the NR-1 was quietly offloaded the Portland in the dead of the night. 15 days later, at a predetermined rally point away from the Strait of Messina, the NR-1 snuck back onto the Portland, again under the cover of a dark night, and headed back to port in the U.S. under a tent. The NR-1 found something at the bottom of the strait and photographed it. The pictures were taken back to the Pentagon where they were studied. The crew was never officially told what was discovered at the bottom of the Strait of Messina. Some crew members aboard the NR-1 believed what was located on the bottom of the strait were sunken Soviet hydrophones, similar to our sound surveillance system or SOSUS system. Another declassified mission the NR-1 was involved in occurred in 1986 after the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. The NR-1 collected debris from the Space Shuttle, which was scattered along the sea floor. Although the NR-1 was decommissioned in 2008, many of its missions remain classified to this day, and I believe another secret sub took the place of the aging NR-1. What do you think? If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Until next time, Trash Panda Actual out.